Good morning from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. I'm Stephen Clark, editor of spaceflightnow.com, and welcome to our live coverage of the Starlink 4-10 mission. You're looking at a live view of Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. We're located a few miles away, looking live at the Falcon 9 rocket standing vertical out on pad 40. Liftoff scheduled for 8:45 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, or 13:45 UTC for those of you in other time zones. This mission will carry 48 more Starlink internet satellites into orbit to join SpaceX's global broadband network. The mission comes just 6 days since the most recent Starlink mission, which launched from Pad 39A a few miles to the north last Thursday. SpaceX is continuing its weekly launch cadence to begin 2022. The Falcon 9 was rolled out to Pad 40 from SpaceX's hangar just south of the launch complex over the weekend and raised vertical in preparation for today's launch attempt. Everything looks good right now for a launch at 8:45 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Weather conditions are nearly ideal, clear skies, light winds here on Florida's Space Coast. The latest check of the weather forecast from the launch weather officer indicates a greater than 90% chance of acceptable weather for today's launch opportunity at 8:45 a.m. Eastern. Now, T-minus 52 minutes and counting, 52 minutes away from launch of SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral. This mission is carrying 48 new satellites to join SpaceX's Starlink global internet network. Those satellites are flat packed inside the payload fairing of the Falcon 9 out at Pad 40. This image shows a view from a previous mission of a stack of Starlink satellites as they were prepared for encapsulation inside the payload fairing of a Falcon 9. In this view, you can see that one half of the payload shroud is visible behind the stack of satellites. That payload shroud stands around 43 feet tall, around 17 feet in diameter. And those 48 satellites are flat packed inside the payload fairing and will separate all at once a little over an hour after liftoff today. You can see in this view, between those satellites, if you look closely, you can see the metal retention rods. Those rods hold the 48 satellites firmly to the Falcon 9 rocket during launch. And then SpaceX, the Falcon 9 issues a command to release those retention rods at the proper time, allowing those 48 satellites to fly free. Each of the Starlink satellites weighs around a quarter ton, or roughly 500 pounds, or 270 kilograms, give or take. These satellites are powered by solar arrays. Those solar arrays will deploy after the satellites are released from the Falcon 9 upper stage. And those solar panels also generate electricity for the satellite's onboard ion propulsion system. Those ion engines will control the orbit of the satellites during their lives, during their operational lifetimes. The satellites are built on an assembly line that SpaceX has up in Redmond, Washington. And the satellites today are heading to an operational orbit around 335 miles or 540 kilometers above Earth at an inclination of 53.2 degrees to the equator. This view shows a picture of a Starlink ground antenna. So users and customers on the Starlink network can use antennas like this one to connect up with satellites as they fly overhead. And the idea is that SpaceX has enough satellites to have multiple spacecraft constantly in view of any user on the ground. And the antenna autonomously receives signals from the satellites as they fly overhead and change position in the sky. Now, approaching the T-minus 49 minute mark in today's countdown, weather conditions are looking very good for launch this morning, with a greater than 90% chance of good weather for liftoff at 8:45 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's 13:45 UTC for those of you in other time zones. Now T minus 46 minutes. In the next few minutes, SpaceX's launch team in the Launch Control Center here at Cape Canaveral will be polled for a go or no-go to continue with the countdown. SpaceX's launch conductor will check in with each member of the Falcon 9 launch team to make sure all conditions are favorable, make sure all parameters are within limits for the start of the final auto sequence, which begins at T minus 35 minutes. That automatic countdown sequence begins the process to load propellants into the Falcon 9 rocket. Falcon 9 will be loaded with RP1, which is a highly refined rocket-grade kerosene fuel, along with cryogenic liquid oxygen. Both stages use the same combination of propellants. That propellant loading process is due to get underway 10 minutes from now at T minus 35 minutes. Now less than 40 minutes to go until today's launch opportunity at 8:45 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, or 13:45 UTC. For this mission, SpaceX intends to land the first stage booster on the drone ship a Shortfall of Gravitas, which is holding position roughly 400 miles or 650 kilometers downrange southeast of Cape Canaveral. That drone ship is located in the Atlantic Ocean, just northeast of the Bahamas. Nearby, SpaceX has a recovery boat also standing by to retrieve the two halves of the payload shroud. That payload fairing is essentially the nose cone of the Falcon 9, and inside that nose cone, the 48 Starlink satellites are awaiting liftoff today. In this view of Space Launch Complex 40, the Falcon 9 rocket stands nearly 230 feet tall, that's 70 meters. Just to the right of the rocket is the strongback structure, that's the umbilical tower that supports the Falcon 9 while it's on the launch pad, also serves as the transporter and erector arm to lift the Falcon 9 vertical before launch. And those four towers, two on each side of the launch vehicle, are lightning protection masts. Those lightning towers protect the rocket from thunderstorms and electrical damage in the event of a lightning strike near the pad. Lightning is a fairly common occurrence here in Central Florida, and all of the launch pads here at Cape Canaveral and at Kennedy Space Center have lightning protection. That start of the propellant loading process should begin in less than 3 minutes at T-minus 35 minutes.
This is Launch Director Countdown with the board instructions. For urgent issues affecting the safety of the operation, operators shall call hold, hold, hold on the countdown net. Launch control will abort the launch auto sequence immediately and proceed into the launch abort auto sequence. At T-minus 10 seconds, launch control will be hands-off and relying on automated abort criteria for the remainder of the count. LD out. Launch auto sequence is started.
Now, inside of 35 minutes until launch, you're listening to audio from the SpaceX launch team. And that launch auto sequence did begin on time at T-minus 35 minutes to begin the loading of kerosene and liquid oxygen into the two-stage Falcon 9 launch vehicle. Kerosene and liquid oxygen are flowing into stage 1 at this time, and kerosene is also being pumped into stage 2. Liquid oxygen will begin loading into stage 2 at T-minus 16 minutes. So 3 of the 4 main propellant tanks on board the Falcon 9 now being filled with propellant. Now T-minus 33 minutes and counting. The winds are picking up somewhat here at Cape Canaveral this morning. You can see some of the foliage and brush and limbs in motion due to the wind. However, winds are within limits, and there is still a greater than 90% chance of good weather, favorable weather, for liftoff at 8:45 a.m. Eastern Standard Time or 13:45 UTC. Once again, this mission is set to haul 48 more Starlink internet satellites into orbit. The rocket will head southeast from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station to place these 48 satellites into orbit, targeting an orbital inclination of 53.2 degrees either side of the equator. Now, approaching the T-minus 27-minute point in the countdown, you can see the first wisps of vapor. That vapor venting from the Falcon 9 is gaseous oxygen. That's caused as the super cold oxidizer is loaded into the first stage of the Falcon 9 out at pad 40. That liquid oxygen is chilled several hundred degrees below zero. And as it boils off in the ambient Florida temperature, the liquid converts to a gas and the vapors are visible venting from the Falcon 9 and the strong back out at pad 40. Given the time of day, the Falcon 9 is somewhat backlit by the sun. This view looking due east approximately from our viewing location here on the Space Coast of Florida. However, on other days, and if you look closely today, you might be able to see the first hints of frost and ice building up on the outer skin of the first stage airframe. That, again, is also caused by the super cold oxidizer that's being loaded into the rocket at this time. The countdown just passed the T-minus 26-minute point. Everything looking good for liftoff at 8:45 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's 13:45 UTC. This mission is designated Starlink 4-10. It's carrying 48 more satellites for SpaceX's Starlink internet network. Again, you're looking at a live view of Space Launch Complex 40 here at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. The Falcon 9 out on the launch pad stands 229 feet or 70 meters tall. These labels show the major components of the Falcon 9. The first stage is labeled there. That first stage booster is powered by 9 Merlin 1D engines. Those engines will generate a combined thrust of 1.7 million pounds. That's more than 20 million horsepower to power the Falcon 9 off the pad. Above that is the interstage adapter structure. And above that is the second stage, which is powered by a single Merlin vacuum engine. That's a derivative of the Merlin 1D engine used on the first stage. That Merlin vacuum engine has a larger larger engine bell or engine nozzle that's optimized for higher efficiency thrust in the vacuum of space. That nozzle is contained within the interstage structure during the first phases of launch. And above that is the payload fairing. That fairing stands 43 feet tall by itself and measures around 5.2 meters or roughly 17 feet in diameter. And inside that fairing, the 48 Starlink internet satellites are fastened down, ready for their ride to space this morning from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. T-minus 22 minutes and 42 seconds. Coming up in about 2 minutes, the second stage should be fully loaded with kerosene fuel. And about the same time, the chill down process to thermally condition propellant lines leading up to the second stage for liquid oxygen loading will get underway. That sets the stage for the actual loading of liquid oxygen due to begin at T-minus 16 minutes. And when that happens at T-minus 20 minutes, when that chill down process gets underway, you'll see some purging of the propellant lines in this view. as well as a so-called big vent of gaseous oxygen coming from that strong back. And that's another indicator that the propellant loading process is continuing on schedule for launch at 8:45 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The first stage on today's mission is designated B-1052 in SpaceX's fleet. It's making its fourth trip to space today. It began its life as a side booster for Falcon Heavy rockets, flying in April 2019 and also in June of 2019 on the Arabsat 6A and STP-2 missions. SpaceX then converted the booster to a Falcon 9 first stage by removing some of the attachment mechanisms and hardware used to fasten to the Falcon Heavy center core booster. The Falcon Heavy, again, uses a 3 booster configuration with 3 Falcon first stages bolted together. You're seeing that big vent now, vapors coming away from the strong back as the propellant lines, the liquid oxygen lines in that strong back are being purged and thermally conditioned for the start of liquid oxygen loading into the second stage. Those lines that lead to the second stage are routed from the ground level up that strong back and then across over into the rocket itself. Now less than 20 minutes to go until liftoff.
Stage 2 fuel load is complete.
Now, T-minus 16 minutes and 30 seconds. You're seeing that venting now beginning to cut off from the strong back. That's indicating that the second stage is now being loaded with liquid oxygen. This liquid oxygen is chilled several hundred degrees below zero and is already being loaded into the first stage and is due to begin loading now into the second stage. And that visual indication of the cutoff of that vent does indicate that the loading has begun. This liquid oxygen will be consumed as an oxidizer in combination with rocket-grade kerosene that's already being loaded into the rocket. And we just heard confirmation that the stage 2 LOX, or liquid oxygen load, has indeed started. Now less than 16 minutes left in the countdown for SpaceX's Starlink 4-10 mission, ready for liftoff from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. Now, T-minus 15 minutes and 15 seconds. The Falcon 9 will head southeast from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station after liftoff today. After launching from Space Launch Complex 40, the Falcon 9 will head downrange over the Atlantic Ocean. The first stage will shut down and separate around 2.5 minutes into the mission, and then begin its descent toward a shortfall of Gravitas, one of SpaceX's 3 rocket landing platforms, or drone ships, which is positioned around 400 miles or 650 kilometers southeast of the Cape, northeast of the Bahamas. When the second stage takes over, the rocket's Merlin vacuum upper stage engine will perform a right-hand turn, or yaw maneuver, also called a dogleg maneuver, to line up with the mission's target orbital plane at an inclination of 53.2 degrees, or an angle of 53.2 degrees to the equator. This dogleg maneuver is necessary to avoid a flyover of the Bahamas and avoid the low probability, although a real probability, of any debris falling over populated areas in the event of an accident during launch. This map shows the launch hazard area for the Starlink 4-10 mission, showing the hazard area offshore from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, where maritime traffic is not permitted for safety reasons during today's launch. Now, less than 14 minutes to go, T-minus 13 minutes and 37 seconds to be exact. You're looking again at a live shot of Space Launch Complex 40, where the Falcon 9 is being loaded with propellants at this hour for liftoff at 8:45 a.m. Eastern Time, or 13:45 UTC. Now, T-minus 10 minutes and 50 seconds. The Falcon 9 rocket with these 48 Starlink satellites will take about an hour and 6 minutes to reach the targeted orbit for today's mission and then deploy those 48 satellites. The rocket will reach the period of maximum dynamic pressure, or max Q, about 1 minute and 12 seconds after liftoff. Around the same time, the Falcon 9 will be surpassing the speed of sound, just a few seconds earlier from that, actually. The first stage will separate around 2.5 minutes after liftoff, giving way to the second stage, which will light its Merlin vacuum engine to continue the climb into orbit. That orbit insertion burn by the upper stage will occur in simultaneous with the return of the first stage booster. That first stage will perform an entry burn using 3 of its Merlin engines, and then a final landing burn to slow down for a touchdown on the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas. That landing expected at T+8 minutes and 51 seconds. Around the same time as that landing, the second stage should be entering a parking orbit with the cutoff of its Merlin engine. The Merlin upper stage engine will relight at T+56 minutes and 50 seconds for a very short, approximately 1 second burn to nudge those 48 Starlink satellites into a more circular orbit, setting the stage for deployment at T+1 hour, 5 minutes, and 52 seconds. This mission will mark the 144th launch of a Falcon 9 rocket since 2010. It's the 152nd flight of a variant of the SpaceX Falcon rocket family since 2006. As we mentioned before, it's the 4th flight of this particular Falcon booster. It's also the 81st SpaceX launch from Space Launch Complex 40 and the 136th flight overall from that pad, including Titan rockets that launched from there before SpaceX took over the facility around 15 years ago. It's the 40th dedicated launch for SpaceX's Starlink network, the 10th SpaceX launch of the year, and the 11th orbital launch attempt overall from Cape Canaveral and Kennedy Space Center in 2022. Now, around 8.5 minutes to go in the countdown this morning. Everything looking good for liftoff at 8:45 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, or 13:45 UTC. Now, around 6.5 minutes left in the countdown. The chill down of the first stages of Merlin 1D engines began less than a minute ago at T-minus 7 minutes. This chill down is essentially a procedure to thermally condition those engines for their flight today. It involves flowing small amounts of super cold liquid oxygen through some of the engine components and through some of the turbo machinery to condition those parts for the more rapid flow of super cold propellant. while those engines are firing during today's mission. At this point in the countdown, SpaceX's guidance system on the Falcon 9 rocket is also being verified ready for flight. And we just heard confirmation from SpaceX's launch team that the stage 1 fuel load has been completed.
Pressing tanks for strong back retract.
Now, T-minus 4 minutes and 10 seconds, SpaceX is beginning to the process to retract the strong back, which is that vertical tower or structure just to the right side of the Falcon 9. That strong back will be lowered to an angle of 1.5 degrees relative to the vertical Falcon 9 out on pad 40. The clamps are opening at the top of that strong back to release its grip on the Falcon 9. That strong back will again be lowered to 1.5 degrees, and then at liftoff will swing away from the rocket to allow the Falcon 9 to begin its vertical climb away from Cape Canaveral.
Stage 1, lock load complete.
Now, around 2 minutes and 10 seconds left in the countdown.
Stage 2, lock load complete.
Now about a minute left in the countdown. The Falcon 9 rocket is being transitioned to startup mode. The Falcon 9's onboard computer is now in control of the countdown. The propellant tanks will be pressurized in preparation for flight. The rocket now fully loaded with more than 1 million pounds of liquid propellants. The fully loaded rocket with propellants and structure weighs on 1.2 million pounds.
Time to let the American broomstick fly and hear the sounds of freedom. LD is go for launch.
We're going to let you listen to SpaceX's countdown in the final phase of the countdown today.
T-minus 15. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engines full power. And liftoff.
Liftoff of the Falcon 9, carrying 48 more Starlink satellites into orbit for SpaceX's global internet network.
Vehicles pitching downrange.
Nominal first stage chamber pressures.
The Falcon 9 now heading downrange, T plus 50 seconds. 1.7 million pounds of thrust from those 9 Merlin engines powering the Falcon 9 into the sky, heading southeast from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station on SpaceX's 10th flight of 2022.
Vehicle supersonic. Max Q.
Now T plus 1 minute 45 seconds. You've heard the call outs from SpaceX that the rocket is now supersonic and has passed max Q, which is the period of maximum aerodynamic pressure on the rocket as it climbs through the thick lower atmosphere. T plus 2 minutes. Coming up on cutoff of the Falcon 9's 9 Merlin engines at 2.5 minutes after liftoff. There is MECO, main engine cutoff, has been confirmed.
Stage separation confirmed.
And back ignition.
Fairing separation confirmed.
And we've heard confirmation of stage separation and fairing separation. The second stage is Merlin engine now firing to push those 48 satellites into orbit today. The first stage is beginning its descent back toward the drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You, in the Atlantic Ocean, downrange around 400 miles southeast of Cape Canaveral. We're now looking at a live view from onboard cameras on the Falcon 9. This view from SpaceX does come with a slight delay. On the left, you see a view from the first stage showing those grid fins now deployed to begin its descent back toward the drone ship. On the right, the Merlin vacuum engine glowing red hot, firing into orbit with these 48 Starlink satellites. Continuing to look at live views, a split screen from SpaceX from two cameras on board. The Falcon 9 on the left, a downward-facing camera on stage 1. On the right, a downward-facing or rear-facing camera on stage 2. That second stage continuing its orbital insertion burn. These 48 Starlink satellites. The first stage continuing its descent. It's reached its peak altitude now in its arcing trajectory, now descending back toward Earth for landing. Now see on the left-hand view, the entry burn. 3 Merlin engines have reignited to begin the Falcon 9 boosters, or to slow down the Falcon 9 boosters' descent toward the drone ship. Both vehicles reported on a nominal trajectory this time. You're now hearing callouts from SpaceX's launch team about the stage 1 landing. Legs have been deployed, and the center engine on the first stage has started its landing burn to slow down for the touchdown on the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas. Now a view from the drone ship. It just cut out, as it often does as the Falcon 9 makes its way toward the deck. We've heard confirmation from SpaceX's launch team that the second stage has entered orbit, has shut down its engine and entered a parking orbit as planned. Just standing by for confirmation now of the first stage's landing. We heard the landing leg deploy call and the call of the landing burn, but haven't heard confirmation of the landing itself. So no confirmation yet of the first stage landing from SpaceX. We'll stand by for that news. SpaceX reports the first stage did indeed land on the drone ship. We didn't see any live views of that event, but SpaceX has confirmed the landing of the first stage did occur on the drone ship. There is a view of the first stage on the drone ship. Of course, a shortfall of gravitas, rather, in the Atlantic, northeast of the Bahamas. This was the fourth flight to space for this particular Falcon booster, and the 111th overall recovery of a Falcon booster since 2015. You're now looking at an animation of the location of the second stage approaching the northeastern coastline of South America. After flying over the Caribbean Sea, the Falcon 9 now heading southeast over South America, passing over the coast of Venezuela. It'll be shortly passing over Brazil and heading out over the Atlantic Ocean. The first stage booster location is also labeled in this view from SpaceX on the drone ship northeast of the Bahamas. A successful start to SpaceX's 10th flight of the year, with 48 more Starlink satellites now in a parking orbit. The second stage will relight its Merlin vacuum engine at T plus 55 minutes or so for a very brief 1 second burn. that restart expected at T+ 56 minutes and 50 seconds for a very brief orbit circularization burn to raise the low point or perigee of its orbit up to roughly 189 miles or 305 kilometers. That's the targeted deployment or drop-off orbit for today's mission. That'll be followed by separation of the 48 satellites all together at T+ 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 52 seconds. That's approximately 9:51 a.m. Eastern Time or 14:51 UTC. That separation event will occur while the rocket is flying outside the range of ground stations, so SpaceX won't be able to receive real-time confirmation via telemetry when that occurs, or live video also won't be available. But confirmation will come down to SpaceX's control team once the Falcon 9 passes back in range of a ground station a few minutes later. With this launch away, we're still standing by for the final confirmation of success, but with this launch away, the next missions we'll be covering include a scheduled launch March 18th of the next 3-person crew heading up to the International Space Station. That launch is scheduled from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan on March the 18th. Liftoff is targeted for 11:55 a.m. Eastern Time on that day. That's 15:55 UTC. From the Baikonur Cosmodrome, carrying 3 Russian cosmonauts up to the space station, where they'll stay for about 6 months. That'll be followed on the same day by a Falcon 9 launch, again from Space Launch Complex 40, carrying the next group of Starlink internet satellites to space. That launch is scheduled for the night of March 18th, local time here at Cape Canaveral. And then following that, SpaceX's next mission is set for March 30th with the Axiom 1 crew heading up to the International Space Station. This is an all-private, all-commercial crew mission to the space station. It'll be the first such flight to the station that doesn't have any direct involvement from NASA or any government space agency. Four people, a professional astronaut, a retired NASA astronaut, Mike Lopez Alegria, will command the Crew Dragon Endeavour spacecraft for the flight up to the station, joined by 3 paying passengers. They'll spend around 10 days in space, around 9 of those on the space station, performing experiments and enjoying the environment of space. That launch scheduled to go from Pad 39A at Kennedy Space Center. And then following that, the next launch on SpaceX's calendar is set for around April 1st, no earlier than April 1st. That's going to be SpaceX's Transporter 4 mission, the 4th dedicated rideshare flight for SpaceX, carrying a large number of small satellites into orbit for commercial and government customers. These missions in the past have carried sometimes more than 100 small satellites to space, heading for a polar orbit from Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. So that's what's to come in the next 3 weeks or so. There may be some other launches around the world sprinkled in here, but launch dates for those are not confirmed at this time. But these are the confirmed target dates for the next 4 missions that we'll be covering. You're looking again at a live view of Space Launch Complex 40, the strung back there in its retracted launch position after swinging away at liftoff. We'll continue to bring you coverage on social media as well as on spaceflightnow.com of the remaining flight events today, including that restart of the upper stage engine and separation of the Starlink satellites. That confirmation should come in around an hour or so, and we'll bring you that as soon as we hear that from SpaceX. So nearly 19 minutes after liftoff, we're going to conclude our live commentary at this time. We thank you for joining us. If you want to support our coverage, you can go to spaceflightnow.com and click the members tab at the top of the homepage. Any contribution you can offer helps us bring you this live coverage. So we appreciate any help or any support you can offer. It really goes a long way. So until next time, I'm Stephen Clark reporting live from Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.